One of the most unique capabilities of DesignR PRO 2 is its ability to make rhinestone patterns. DesignR PRO 2 has some very unique, time-saving tools and features specifically designed for this application. In this lesson, we'll cover how to make those patterns within DesignR PRO 2, and then, after cutting the pattern on the cutter, we'll show the process of taking that rhinestone pattern and using it to apply rhinestones to a t-shirt. What we'll first cover is how to place rhinestones along the path or a border, such as in the case of this heart. Afterwards, we'll cover how the heart and the objects surrounding it can be filled with rhinestones. Let's first select the heart. The next step is choosing the rhinestone function. There are several ways to get into the rhinestone function. The first is by clicking on the Transform pull-down menu, hovering over Rhinestones, and then selecting Rhinestone Fill. The second way is by clicking on the Effects flyout toolbar, and then clicking on the last button on the left of the flyout toolbar, which is the Rhinestone Fill function. The last method is to make a toolbar of just the rhinestone tools, which we've done here. If you decide you would like to make a rhinestone toolbar, review the lesson on tips and tricks where it details the steps specifically for making a toolbar with only rhinestone tools. On the rhinestone toolbar, let's click on the first button that resembles a heart with rhinestones. This will display all the options and settings for placing the rhinestones in the smart bar. The smart bar is divided into two main sections. The left side has settings for placing rhinestones on line segments or paths. The right side has settings for filling objects with rhinestones. Let's start with placing the rhinestones on the outline. First, let's make sure that the outline function is activated by clicking on this checkmark, and the fill settings checkmark is disabled. This will allow us to view how each will affect an object. This button and the value next to it are used with regard to the distance between the rhinestones. We'll leave these two settings for right now and come back after the rhinestones have been placed. This way we can get a visual on how they affect the overall look of the pattern. For right now, we first need to place the rhinestones. By clicking on the Select Elements button, we can choose the rhinestone element to be used in the pattern. The Element Selector window will appear, allowing us to choose the size and shape, and the color of the rhinestones that we want to use. These are the Graphtec standard rhinestones. Shown in this window are different sizes of rhinestones, starting from the largest to the smallest. Up here, we can also choose different lines of rhinestones, such as the Swarovski line of rhinestone shapes, but for this demonstration, we'll use the Graphtec line and select the SS16. Before clicking Add, there is a color palette of rhinestone colors that can be chosen if the current color doesn't suit the design. For right now, we'll keep the rhinestones as purple. To add the rhinestone, click the Add button, and then click OK. The rhinestones are placed around the heart, as we would expect. Of course, you may be experienced in creating rhinestone patterns and how they should fit, so you may have a certain distance in mind for the type of rhinestone that you plan to use. If this is the case, by all means then, just enter the number in this field here. Keep in mind that the button just to the left of the value determines whether we want the spacing to be between each rhinestone or between the center points of each rhinestone. In this case, we'll use these tiny up and down arrow buttons to increase and lower the value or the distance between each rhinestone. This allows us to progressively see what is visually best for the design. As the value is adjusted, the rhinestones expand and contract depending if we increase or decrease the value, until it's where we like. Let's add some interest to this design. Let's click on the Select Elements button again, where we can also add other colors and sizes of stones as well. This time we'll add a larger SS30 stone. We'll change the color to red to distinguish it from the others. Click Add, and then click OK. Something to take notice of is how this will be cut. Currently we not only have each rhinestone circle, but the shapes used as a border as well. In the Cut pull-down menu at the bottom, is this Rhinestones Only option. Clicking on this option will tell the software to cut only the rhinestones, but not the shapes. To prove this, let's switch to the Cut Preview mode. In this mode, notice that the only thing that's showing that will be cut are the rhinestones, leaving out the shapes. Keep in mind that if you draw a special shape in the workspace that you'd like to use for a rhinestone, the software will not recognize it as a rhinestone. Only the rhinestones taken from the Rhinestone Elements library supplied in iDesigner Pro 2 will be recognized. We will talk about how to remedy this in just a moment. Let's undo this and start over. This time we'll fill the shapes in this design with rhinestones rather than outlining it. We'll select the heart and the rays, and click on the Rhinestone Fill button again, and deactivate the outline as well. We need to activate the fill by placing the check mark here. We'll choose the rhinestone size, and then after that we'll make the adjustments. Let's click Select Elements, this time on the right side of the fill section. This time we'll choose the size 6 rhinestone, the SS6GR. We'll select a red color, click Add, and then click OK. In this section we're dealing with fill settings. There is this pull-down list of different fill patterns that we can choose. The first is a line pattern, which is the current setting. The spiral, center line spiral, random, center, grid, staggered grid, and other patterns. There are quite a few that you can experiment with. This value in the fill section dictates the margin between the outline of the shape and the rhinestones filling the shapes. Notice how this affects the edges as we increase the number. This value here is spacing that determines the distance between elements, whether by the distance between the center points, or a base in between each rhinestone. By increasing or decreasing this value, we see how they expand or contract. As values and settings for the rhinestones change, the number of rhinestones or the fill count will change as well. This count is displayed up here. If we briefly enable the outline and add some rhinestones, we can get the count of rhinestones used for both the fill and the outline. Combine the two counts and this will give you the total number of stones that it will take to make this pattern. This helps when determining the cost for each type of design. Let's turn off the outline again. The angle of the rhinestone pattern can be adjusted with this value here, just to give it a different look. At the bottom of the design, we've added some text with a single stroke font. What's convenient is that iDesigner Pro 2 is supplied with several different single stroke fonts. Let's go over how to use them and why we would want to use them. Let's double click on the text and change the font to a different type by first selecting the text. iDesigner Pro 2 is supplied with single stroke fonts for the benefit of simplifying the lettering pattern to make it easier to read on the t-shirt or fabric. All the single stroke fonts that are available are in the software's native VEF font format. VEF fonts can be identified by the V on the side of the font. For instance, let's change this font to Dino. Once located, we'll double click on the font. We'll center justify the text, and then we'll click on the text with the select tool to adjust the position. We can now click on the Rhinestone Fill button. Make sure the fill is disabled and the outline is enabled. Click on the Select Elements button. Make some final adjustments to the spacing, and now the single stroke text has rhinestones applied to it. This demonstration proves the value of using single stroke fonts. Let's look at the other rhinestone tools. These tools can be very useful in other situations when making rhinestone patterns. Looking at the rhinestone toolbar, this button next to the rhinestone fill button is called the Drop Rhinestone tool. This tool, as it suggests, places single rhinestones in areas that need to be filled in order to complete the shape. For instance, in this design, we need to place rhinestones at the end of the legs of the spider to complete it. Let's first zoom in on the spider. Next, we'll click on the Drop Rhinestone button, and this window appears asking us to select a rhinestone. We'll select the size of SS6. The color we'll keep as purple. Click Add, and then OK. Notice that the cursor or the pointer changes to something that resembles a bomb sight. This will help us to know where to drop the rhinestone accurately. Hover the bomb sight over the spot where the rhinestone is to be placed, and then just click. We can fill in the end of the legs with the rhinestones. The next button has to do with replacing rhinestone shapes. Here's a scenario. You have a rhinestone design pattern that has been imported from another application. You like the pattern, but would like to replace the rhinestones with a different size and color. Or you'd like to replace them with rhinestones found in the library. This is where the next function, Replace with Rhinestones, can be used. Here's an imported design from a PDF document. Right now, the software thinks that these are just plain circles. If we click on one of the circles, it will show this in the upper left-hand corner. To convert them to a rhinestone in the library, let's select all the circles. Next, we'll click on Replace with Rhinestones in the Rhinestone toolbar. The Smart Bar will provide controls for specifying how these rhinestones are to be placed. The first step is to click on the Choose Replacement button, similar to the Select Element button we have used before. We'll click on the desired rhinestone size that we want to replace it with, and then we want to select the color by the color picker. In this case, we'll choose red. And then we'll click the Add button, click OK, and now click Replace. The benefit to this is the ability to change the rhinestones quickly if we need to later on. In other words, this operation puts the imported pattern in a format that it recognizes. We can now click Close. By the way, this Replace with Rhinestone function is also a good way of converting patterns that you have designed in DesignR PRO 2 as well. You might find a case where you have a current pattern where you need to change the size of the rhinestones, and this is an easy and simple way of doing this. What is really useful is being able to use an image to place rhinestones. On the screen is a bitmap that we used in the lesson on tracing images. The goal here is to place red rhinestones on the black part of the apple. First, we'll select the image. Next, click on Rhinestone Fill. Click on Select Element. Use an SS10 rhinestone with a red color, click Add, and then OK. We can see DesignR PRO 2 has filled the black pattern only with rhinestones. Once the material is loaded, prior to cutting, set the blade depth so it cuts through the template material but barely scores the carrier sheet. Also, set the force setting. It should be between 25 to 30, but it's always a good idea to do some test cuts and readjust the settings according to the material that you're using. Let's go through the process of cutting the pattern. First, we want to load the rhinestone template material onto the cutter. Going back to the software, prior to sending the pattern to the cutter, we have to make sure that the Only Output Rhinestone option is enabled. That's this button here. Recall earlier that this option can also be set under the Cut pull-down menu. Let's cut this by clicking on the Cut button in the Tools toolbar. Here is the rhinestone pattern in Cut Preview mode. To verify that the pattern will cut, or will fit into this cut area on the cutter, click on the Pole Plotter button on the Cut toolbar to obtain the dimensions of the cut area. Once this is done, notice that the pattern is shown to be outside the range of the cut area. Keep in mind that you don't ever want to resize the design. This will make the holes smaller and the rhinestones won't fit after the pattern is cut. To quickly remedy this, rotate the pattern by clicking on the Rotate Clockwise button on the cut toolbar. And now it fits. As a precaution, you may want to reposition the pattern just a little to make sure the holes are not too close to the edge of the media. If this were a two-colored rhinestone pattern, the suggestion would be to cut a different pattern for each color. If that were the case, we could use the Cut by Color option in the cut toolbar. This will allow us to cut separate patterns for each color in our design. To cut the pattern, click the Cut button on the toolbar. After it has completed cutting, unload the rhinestone template material. Next, peel the back off the template material. Depending on the material you have, this may remove most of the circles. But generally, the most effective way of removing the circles from the stencil material is to take the material, place it on a flat piece of plastic or even a workbench top, and then pull it up. This will cause the majority of the cut holes to separate from the rhinestone stencil sheet. Now we can affix the template material to the rhinestone backing board. Depending on the pattern, this is best done by placing the template face down on a flat surface with the adhesive side facing up. Take the rhinestone backing board and, prior to placing it on the template, make a slight bend in the middle of the board. Lower it onto the template, and then smooth the board down toward both ends. This will reduce the potential for wrinkling. When you turn the template face up, you may discover that some holes weren't removed. To correct this, use an X-Acto knife to remove any of the unopened holes. Once all the holes have been removed, place the board along with the template over a box that's the same size or slightly larger than the template itself. This is to capture any falling rhinestones. Then freely pour the rhinestones onto the template. Next, use a brush to fill in the remaining empty holes. And then remove the excess rhinestones by gently brushing them to the side and off the template. Once all the rhinestones have been placed face up on the template, separate the clear transfer sheet from its backing. Take the transfer tape and cover the design with the sticky side facing the rhinestones. For larger designs, use 2 transfer sheets if needed. Then smooth down the transfer tape enough to ensure that all the rhinestones are attached to the transfer sheet. Next, carefully lift the transfer tape with the attached rhinestones, doing it slowly so that none of the rhinestones will pop off from the transfer sheet. Place the garment onto the heat press. Make sure that you remove all of the wrinkles and that it's lying out as flat as possible. Position the design onto the garment and then close the heat press and keep it down for the allotted time. Once the pattern has had heat applied for the allotted time, pull the garment out and let it cool for about 5 to 10 minutes. Go ahead and remove the transfer tape and here is the final result. As a final note, when washing and drying the garment, always turn the garment inside out during both the wash and dry cycle.